Anybody else? No? Okay, can we just say thank you?
Thank you.
I feel so calm now. your voice is so relaxing and calming. And I think for me, mindfulness is something that I've started to see in my training as a primary teacher, and something that I greatly believe in as well, particularly mental health and things, and the way that society is at the moment. So I'm a big advocate for it as well. So thank you for sharing that. What we're going to do now is going to pass over to Nara.
I just downloaded the app.
Do you need a clicker?
Yeah.
Check which one.
So I'm sorry, I'm late. I ended up forgetting my computer in the hotel. I had to go back, and there was a lot of traffic because of the rain, and I think there's a game. So this is why I'm late. I really apologize. I want to say thank you, Charlotte, for giving me the opportunity to come here today and talk to you all. You may be asking, what is she doing that all the way here? I came for the first time 2 years ago, and I came to learn with you all, actually, because nobody knows more about yourself than you do. There is no book out there, or no physician or specialist or expert that know more about Olea disease and Maffucci syndrome than you do. And when I decided that I wanted to care for patients with Olea disease and Maffucci syndrome in my clinic, I thought that going to find you to tell me about these conditions would really be the way to go. So this is when I came for the first time 2 years ago, and it opened my mind, because what we read in the articles and what we read in the books was really completely different from what I found here. And I was very lucky that you as patients also accepted me on the Facebook groups. So I have learned every day with the patients that I talk to there. I think maybe some of you I have talked to, and I don't even know. So if I did, please talk to me after, or I would love to have a face to the names that I have been talking to on Facebook, or maybe you have seen some of the things that I wrote there. I would love to know who you are. But thank you so much for accepting me in the groups and teaching me about these two conditions, because they are really rare. And when you say that, and I'm sure that you all here have gone to physicians who say, I never heard of it, I never saw a patient with it. So this is what I'm trying to not to do. And I really need your help to learn. So this is where I come from. I come from trying to understand more about the disease so I could give the answers to the patients that come to me in clinic, and not just look at them and say, I never heard of it, I don't know. So I'm a clinical geneticist. I work at Hopkins, and I also do research. And it all started during my PhD at Hopkins. I did medical school in clinical genetics in Brazil, and then I went to Hopkins to do a PhD. And when I was doing my PhD, I came across a big pedigree of a family that had metachondromatosis. So you probably never heard of it, but you heard today earlier from Dr. Flanagan. She was saying some patients have enchondromas and some patients have exostosis, the enchondromatosis, not the osteochondromas, not the enchondromas. So these patients are called patients with multiple exostosis, and the patients with the enchondromas are called patients with Olea. There is a disease where the patients have both. they can have enchondromas and exostosis. And this is called metachondromatosis. So when I was doing my PhD, I came across this big family. You can see every dark black dot or square or circle, it's an affected patient. And you can see how in this family, every generation has multiple people who are affected. And then there was no gene for this disease at the time. Nobody knew what the genetic cause of it was. So I decided to investigate that and try to find what the gene was. And I was very fortunate and lucky that I found a gene that caused that during my PhD. And the gene is called PTPN11. And these are the bumps that you can see in the patients in this family. One interesting thing about metachondromatosis is a much milder disease. These patients, they don't have the deformities in the arms and legs that the patient with Ollier and Maffucci have. The bumps actually disappear with time. They appear during childhood, and nobody knows why. During the teenager years, they just disappear. So this is where I started becoming interested on that. And this goes back to your question, like, why would I do a blood work? You can do the blood work, for example, to try to see if there is a mutation in PTPN11. And if there is a mutation in PTPN11, you can tell the patient, look, it's a mild disease, you don't need to worry about further surgeries later on, you don't need to worry about the risk of cancer. So it's a good news that you can give to the patient if you find mutation in this gene. So this is one of the things that when you come to the clinical geneticist, he may ask, okay, let's do a blood work. It's not to find the cause of Ollier only, it's to rule out other things like that, for example. So at this time during my PhD, my advisor said, okay, you found it, but you're not going to work on it, right? Just let's move on. Well, he was wrong. I started looking what are the other diseases that have enchondromas. And then I found that patients with Ollier disease and Maffucci syndrome also have enchondromas. At the time, it was 2010, there was no gene whatsoever that was known to cause this disease. So I became interested on that. As a PhD student, I started trying to find the patients that had Ollier disease and Maffucci syndrome. I wanted to do the same thing, to try to find the gene that caused the disease. And I did find my first patients were from Brazil. I'm from Brazil. So, and I started trying to do the same kind of research that I did with the patients with metachondromatosis on these patients and trying to find the gene. Turns out it has been much more difficult. This is why I'm still here working with Ollier and Maffucci as of today, 11 years later. So, but it has been really, really very rewarding. This is why I'm here also. So I started trying to understand what Ollier disease and Maffucci syndrome is. And when you go to the literature, this is what you find. You find that Ollier patients have multiple enchondromas, Maffucci patients have multiple enchondromas and vascular anomalies, and that both of them can have this list of features that are here that you all know better than I do. And the key thing that I want to say right now before we move on is not every patient has all these things. Every patient ends up being, to me, almost a different disease. It's almost like we can call Ollier, Maffucci, George, you know, different names, because every patient is it's different from the other one. And this is what I started getting kind of anxious about. I'm like, okay, what do I tell the patients that they should expect for? Because every patient that I see is different. Some of them have 3 or 4 enchondromas that never caused them anything, and they are living their lives without even knowing basically that they have it until they do an X-ray for some reason and they found out that they had it. And then we have patients that have a much more severe presentation, like you just told us about yours, right? And so I started first of all, trying to understand, okay, what should I expect? What should I tell the patient that they should expect? But always with that in my mind, that they have to know that what we expect doesn't have to happen. And the disease can be much milder, and it is much milder in many patients. But on the other hand, I wanted to know why. Right? Why some patients have such a milder phenotype and some patients have a more severe presentation. So this is where I said, okay, there has to be some genetics in there that is causing all this difference. And also, why the patients with Maffucci have the vascular anomalies and the patients with Ollier disease don't. Then in 2011 came the IDH, the finding that the IDH1 and IDH2 mutations were found in some of the tumors of the patients with Ollier and Maffucci. It's approximately 80% of the tumors that were tested in these two publications, they found the mutations in these two genes. This was great, it gave us an insight on what is causing, but I don't think it's all the explanation. So I still think that we have more to find out. And one of the things that we have to find out at least is like how these genes actually are causing the disease, right? So the IDH1 and IDH2, they control 60 other genes downstream. Which one of these is actually causing Ollier, and one of these is actually causing Maffucci? It's all of them, or it's just one or two of them that's actually what we care about? So this is part of what I started working on in the lab as a researcher. But back to clinic, I really wanted to understand what the disease is bringing to us. And then one of the things that I found frustrating in the literature is the risk of cancer. And I'm going to talk a little bit of cancer, and it may be upsetting to some people, so if you don't really want to hear that, I asked Charlotte if I should talk about that or not. She said, just tell people you're going to talk about it. If they want to leave the room, they can. So it can be a little upsetting about it, but it was one of the things that I faced as a physician when the patients came to me. It's like, what do I tell them? I had to give them numbers because it's what they want to know. Then I started thinking, how can I find the numbers? So I went to the literature to see what is there. And when you go to the literature, you find that patients with Ollier disease and Maffucci syndrome, they have a higher risk for chondrosarcoma. And then the risk is like between 20 and 45%. I thought this was a very broad range. I wanted a better number to tell. But this is what we have there. And then when you find, okay, is it only chondrosarcoma, or what are the other kind of cancers that the patients can have, if any? Then you go to the literature, you don't find numbers for that. You just find like, oh, they can have this or that, because one patient one time had one, the other patient the other time had another one, and then they just like start publishing like you have a higher risk to have this kind of cancer. So I said, okay, is it real? Do they really have a higher risk for these cancers? And if they have, what is the number again that we can give to them? So, and I was like, okay, how do I do it? And other questions that came up, as I was telling you before, is like, what else should I expect from Ollier disease and Maffucci syndrome? A lot of patients beyond the enchondromas and beyond the chondrosarcomas, they come with other things that are completely unrelated. Like they tell me like, my child also had developmental delay, or my child also has intellectual disability, my child has a kidney problem, my child has a heart problem. So like, are these part of the condition for some of these patients? Are these completely different things that just happen to be hit by two different things when they were born? So all these questions I'm trying to, I don't have the answer for that. I'm going to show you what I have as of now. It's far from being the final answer, but this is what I'm trying to understand. And then again, what is the exactly risk of a chondrosarcoma, cancer in general, and what are the other cancers? So this will all help me also to tell the patients how often they need to get an X-ray, how often they need to get an MRI, do they need a whole body MRI? As of now, we don't have a guideline, right? You go to the physicians and you feel frustrated because nobody tells you the same thing. One will say like, you don't need anything, the other will say you need an X-ray every year, the other will say no, you need an MRI, the other will say no, you need a CT. It's not their fault, it's just that there is no guideline out there to everybody to follow, and there is no information to us to put a guideline together. So I was trying to come up with an idea of how to get enough information to give back to the patients in the clinic and to come up with a guideline that can help not only the patients but every other physician out there that sees patients with organ malfunction. So what could I do to get this information? The first thing that we can do is go back to the literature and look at all the publications that are there and look at every patient ever described with early disease or ever described with Maffucci syndrome and see what they had and count it. So we did that. And we found that we looked at 287 publications. You can see how rare it is. I'm talking about all the scientific literature. There were 287 papers to us to look at. This is very, very few. If you get other disease, you will find many, many more. So there were 162 patients with early disease described and 199. And this is because Maffucci syndrome is more rare than early disease. So it gets more published because what is published is actually what is different. Then my question was like, okay, I'm going to count what's in the literature. But I just told you the bias that I'm going to find. What is published are the most severe cases. So whatever number I find from my survey, for my review, will be a number that is probably inflated, right? Because a patient with early disease who doesn't have a glioma and doesn't have anything else but 4 enchondromas, he doesn't get published. He's not in the literature. I'm not going to find information about him. He is not going to be counted. So who is going to be counted? All the patients that had gliomas, because gliomas is a rare thing on patients with earlier. So every patient that has a glioma will actually be published. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, but these are the numbers that I have, right? It's the numbers that anybody will have. And this is what usually we use to do guidelines. Well, it's not a bad thing because it means that your guidelines will actually be extra careful, right? So you're actually being extra, doing extra care because the numbers are already inflated. But I thought like, okay, but if I get information directly from the patients, maybe I'll have a better number. Maybe I will get like a better idea of what is really, in general, the presentation of a patient with early disease and Maffucci syndrome. The other thing is like all these papers, most of them are orthopedic papers. What means that they are describing the enchondroma or the chondrosarcoma, or if it's a neurosurgery paper, the glioma. They don't care about the heart problem, the kidney problem, the intellectual disability. So this information never appears in these papers that are in the publication because people are not really describing the patient as everything. They are just touching on whatever they are caring for. So I said, if I talk to the patients, then I'll have a better idea. And this is one thing that Dr. Flanagan told today in the morning that's important about sharing your data, right? The Facebook groups are great support for you, and I think it's great the way that they are managed because there's an administrator, there's someone taking care of it and watching out for you out there. If something that is posted is not what he wants or they want, they will talk to whoever posted it. So it's a very good thing. But when we decided to do that, this was the first thing. It's like, this is what we call personal information, right? We have to be very careful how we are gathering it. So This project was submitted to the IRB of Hopkins, so the ethical committee of Hopkins, from Hopkins, actually reviewed our proposal, made change to it and approved it. They went through the survey to see all the questions that we put in the survey. And this survey is done through the Hopkins tool, the Qualtrics. It's not through Facebook, it's not out there for anybody, it's in the Hopkins firewall. Nobody has access to it. So only someone who is in the project and is in Hopkins has actually access to whatever information you put in the survey, because this is really important. There is personal information there that has to be protected. So this is really something that you should care about. You know, like who you are giving your information to. Make sure that you know that the person is taking the extra steps to protect it. So we did that. We put together 90 questions, but then I needed to get you to know that, right? And this is when I use the Facebook groups. I use the Facebook groups to let you know about the survey and ask you to answer the survey to us. And it was great. We got like, now we have 170, but when I make this calculation, we had 162. And right now, I didn't post the survey link here because we are making some changes to it. So this one I'm not giving you today, but we'll probably be posting that in a month or so on the Facebook groups again, so you can have access. If you didn't answer, it's really helpful to us to know this information for all the reasons that I just told you. But we did get, as of now, what I have here is data from 126 patients with Olia Mafuchi and 36 with Olia and 36 with Mafuchi from 21 countries. But look at the number of Mafuchi patients. They are real, because it is really rare. So the publications are actually inflated just because it's so rare. Every patient with Mafuchi gets published, doesn't matter what. But it's not the real life. You don't really find patients with Mafuchi everywhere, and it makes it even harder to physicians to take care of patients with Mafuchi. Because if I got 36 answers from Mafuchi in 21 countries, can you imagine how many patients with Mafuchi syndrome any physician, any center that you go has seen? It's really very few, right? These data, the analysis of all these numbers that are not numbers, are patients, but what we found with the analysis of these data, we presented in the American Society of Human Genetics meeting last year. We presented in the American College of Medical Genetics in May this year, and it's going to be presented in our orthopedic meeting by the Carol Morris, is the orthopedic surgeon that works with us. I presented the first 2 times. She's going to present the 3rd time. The important thing about it is, like I just told you, people don't know about it.